last time. I think we've got a reasonable number of people that we actually can go around and just do some quick intros so everyone knows who's on and who's who. And I'm just going to go from what I see on my screen. So I'll start with Paul Sidaways on my top left corner.
Hi, everybody. Paul Sidaways, sportsman, landowner.
Great. I'm Pedro Marquez, Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Tana, you're next.
I'm Tana Nolf. I'm the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee, and we have no snow that's stuck in Divide.
All right. Paul and Sandy, you guys are next.
Yeah, Paul and Sandy Clary from the lower Big Hole.
Great. Ben Laporte.
Hey everybody, good to see everyone. Ben Laporte, Programs Manager for the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Great. Jim Hagenbarth.
Jim Hagenbarth, the rancher from Glen.
All right. Glad to have you here, Jim. Thanks. Jim Olson's next.
I'm Jim Olson. I'm fish biologist with FWP on the Big Hole.
Great. Great to see you here. Vanna, you're next.
Anna Bacadori, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, wildlife biologist.
Awesome. Eric Thorson.
I'm Eric Thorson. Hey everybody, Sunrise Fly Shop and Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Great. Steve.
Steve Wilbeck with Butte and Anaconda Area Sportsman.
Fantastic. Mr. Roy. You're muted. You were muted, Roy. Can you say that again?
How's that?
That's better.
Roy Morris, George Grant Trout Unlimited.
All right.
And I want to give photo credits to Steve again.
Oh, that's a shot of his?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
All of the things that are my background are from Steve.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Peter, you are next. Hello.
Hi, I'm Peter Frick, rancher Upper Big Hole.
Awesome. Nice to have you with us again. Rich Harris.
Hi, I'm Rich Harris. I'm with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I work on the grizzly bear plan, and I'm here to listen and learn.
Great. Welcome. Matt Norberg.
Hello, everyone. Matt Norberg, hydrologist with Montana DNRC.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us again. I got Eric. Well, oh no, now Eric switched. Okay, so scratch that. Roy, Rich, Tori Bollinger.
Hi, everyone. I'm a student at Montana Western, and I'm in Erica Krutoff's class currently. And so I'm just going to sit in and take some notes and hopefully learn a little bit.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. Rory Trimbo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Rory Trimbo. I'm the new bear guy with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks up in Anaconda Deer Lodge area. And just wanted to finally make it to one of your guys' meetings.
Awesome. Fantastic. Welcome. Eric Trump.
Hey, so Eric Trump, I work for Montana DEQ in the non-point source program, and also on the board of the Montana Watershed Coordination Council.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Eric. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I was eating, so I figured I'd might get wrong.
Totally. Great for you to have. Great to be here. For you to be here with us. Jesse Newby.
Yeah, I'm Jesse Newby. I'm the new FWP area biologist out of Dillon.
Super. All right, and Laura Lundquist's last name I got.
Yeah, Laura Lundquist, environmental writer, just checking in and seeing what you guys are up to.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for joining us. All right, everybody. That does it for introductions. Let's go ahead and start like we usually do with our climate precip report from Matt.
All right, I will share. Oh, Tana, can you let me share my screen? Okay, can you guys see that?
Not yet. Usually, yep.
Try
it's coming.
that.
Yep, now it's coming.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay, so stream flows from basically September and October on the Big Hole River were generally at or slightly below the long-term median values. Precipitation during December was below average, and September temperatures were above average. I think everyone kind of felt that it was beautiful Indian summer, but that led to kind of decreased water availability throughout the watershed, and it kind of blended into the beginning part of October. But then we started to get some more seasonal temperatures and some couple precipitation events, and brought the stream flows back to normal conditions or slightly above as we are now within the past 2 weeks. So recent and forecasted precipitation across the watershed definitely provides much needed soil moisture as we transition into those winter months when we start freezing up. And here's just a snapshot of stream flow values. And then just to the right of that is kind of the long-term median value. And then below this is a 45-day hydrograph of the Big Hole at Wisdom, and then also the big hole at Melrose. So generally speaking, the upper basin kind of down to Dickey was at or slightly below for most of that time period until just recently, and then the lower river was doing a little bit better with mostly kind of at normal conditions, and then obviously we transition into a little higher stream flows with these last precipitation events and cooler temperatures and lack of evapotranspiration. Okay, so snowpack and precipitation. So October 1st is the official start of water year 2021. And obviously it's very early, but the higher elevations have received some snow and we're off to a good start. Snowpack for the Big Hole based on the representative SNOTEL sites is currently 146% of average. Again, it's really early. We're talking very small amounts, comparatively speaking, and anything that is, above the normal value, posts a fairly large number. So take that into consideration. Precipitation across the watershed for the water year itself is currently at 164% average, same kind of situation. But another round of winter storms is forecasted this week. Sounds like we're kind of starting it today, which should boost snowpack in the high elevations and contribute to soil moisture in the mid elevations and the valleys. Probably up in the upper basin, probably get some snow sticking in the valleys itself. And then here's just a graph that I like to show, snow water equivalent as we start off the water year for the Big Hole itself. And you can see percent of median, 146%. And then again, this is the precipitation in the Big Hole itself. So now we'll get to the forecast. We are definitely in La Nina conditions. So La Nina conditions are present and are likely to continue throughout the Northern Hemisphere throughout the winter. There's an 85% chance of that. So we're in it. And I think it was about a 60 to 65% chance that we're going to persist into those spring months, which is good. So this means for Montana, the Big Hole, generally, La Nina winters in the southern tier of the U.S. tend to be warmer and drier, while the northern tier in Canada tend to be colder and typically a little bit wetter. So these events tend to reach their maximum strength during October and February. And this is a graphic that I showed at the last meeting. It's just kind of a generalized graphic showing how La Nina affects the country And we're definitely in the colder spot with that polar jet stream. The wetter conditions can be variable, but it sounds like from reading a lot of the different forecasts that we can expect to have a wetter than normal winter and even possibly spring. So as we move into the 3-month outlook, oops, that should be October, November, December, excuse me. It's for equal chances of average temperatures and 40% and above 40% chance of above precip. So we're looking at, possibly, near average temperatures, but we are also going to have an increased percentage of precipitation. And so last month's report, I talked about how the forecasts were for above average temperatures and above average precip. Well, seems like in the last couple of weeks, we've definitely transitioned into La Nina conditions, and we're really starting to settle in for Montana transitioning to those cooler and wetter conditions forecasted for the next 3 months, and even farther as we go through out till basically March, April, is we're kind of going to be in that transition, or not transition, but we're going to be in the cooler, wetter areas. So here's a graph that just shows the 3-month outlook for temperature. And then here is the graph that shows the precipitation outlook for the next 3 months. So looking good. Things can obviously change, but this is all the forecasts that I've been reading, looking at. We're definitely in La Nina conditions, and things are shaping up, fingers crossed, to be an average to above average year. So that's good news. And that's all I have for now until we start getting real amounts of snow. Any questions?
Does that jet stream give us any indication about, it doesn't really tell us anything about like wind conditions like that those are unrelated, am I right? Or no?
You mean wind conditions as in?
Well, like
how much it's going to gust around here?
Like, yeah, like windier than normal. I mean, I'm just, when I just see that graphic, it looks like, for some reason, it looks like wind to me, but I know that those things could completely be unrelated. And
well, I guess this is the jet stream itself, which is, very high up in the atmosphere. But no, I haven't really read anything or about windier than normal conditions. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I haven't read anything that indicates that yet.
Sure. Okay. All right. Any questions about forecast or precip?
Okay.
And we did have brief closures there in Wisdom, temporary closure of the river for low flows, but luckily it started getting wet after about a week. Is that about right, Matt? Did you track that? It's about a week, I think.
We need to be above 40 CFS at Wisdom, at least for the upper section. I believe it's 4 days, 4 consecutive days.
Mm-hmm. And we dipped down below 20 for a little bit there.
We did, and that's just that hot, dry conditions.
Yeah.
And it's tough. There's just not water to be had when it's like
yeah.
that. And that kind of was the theme from about, the end of July till really, we had a couple little storms in the beginning of September, but it was really up until about the first week or so of October. So it's just warmer than normal and drier than normal.
Yeah. And I'll just mention too that I think it's important, something that strikes me when we get into those conditions and I talk to either you or folks with the CCAA program or even start looking at the stream gauges, you can physically see when calls go out to landowners and they stop taking water, and you can literally see bumps back up in the hydrograph as our voluntary commitments to keep the river flowing. get kicked into place. So for anyone that's not familiar with those processes, I think it's just an important thing to keep track of, and it's very real and it's very noticeable when these commitments to the resource are put into action through these programs. It's notable, and you can literally see it in the hydrograph. It's powerful stuff.
Yep, it sure is.
Cool. Any other questions for Matt? If not, then Tana, let's pull up my director's report and I'll get going. Couple new folks join us. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to start, and I'm going to try to blow through this pretty quickly. We're still getting results, and there's still more to come, but I've been hounding folks since April about this stream gauge survey. We are working with the state, the DNRC. They have put together a working group to look at the stream gauge infrastructure in Montana and trying to come up with a more consistent, sustainable path forward for funding our stream gauges. One of the first steps that we took as a group was to put out a survey to find out who uses these gauges and for what, so that we can really build the case. And the position that I've been pushing is that these stream gauges are critical infrastructure, and we should, as much as we can, move away from each gauge kind of to its own devices being funded by the goodwill of people that find that gauge important, and more towards a statewide network of infrastructure that has funding attached to it. For those of you that don't know, the Big Hole Watershed Committee we put in about 10 grand a year to keep parts of 4 gauges running on the river. And those are the gauges that everybody's looking at, whether you're fishing or recreating or looking at flood control or anything like that. So these are some of the results I'll share with you real quick from that survey. There's still some work to do diving into the data and teasing some things apart. So if anybody has any thoughts or insights into gauge use, some of you provided your email addresses, and we'll be reaching out and just kind of exploring this further. The more input we can get on this, the better. You can see the Big Hole, the word cloud is sort of what came up in the survey. The Big Hole was very well represented in that survey. Thank you everyone that chimed in and took the survey. You can see the zip codes down below. The sort of 597 area is generally kind of in our zone. Really, so 573 people across the state filled out the survey. Personal recreation was by far the highest, but it was only 40% of all uses. So a full 60% of people didn't have personal or recreation as the primary reason why they looked at the gauges. There was another question about secondary reasons. Lots of professional folks looking at emergency management, drought information. There were lots of engineering types that use the stream gauges, and then anybody recreating that's trying to decide where they're going to go based on flows. It's pretty important. There were a total of like 15 questions. Let's go to the next slide, Tana, please. And I'm just pulling out, so that was one of the main sort of take-home messages. The other one that I thought was very interesting is we asked, we put out the number that the average cost to maintain a stream gauge is about $18,000 annually for each stream gauge for maintenance. This is after the cost of installing them. And over 60% of respondents thought that that was way more than they thought it cost to maintain a stream gauge. And this is kind of important for people to understand and recognize that it's a big lift to keep these gauges operating. Lots of people benefit from them, and very few entities are paying for them. And that's kind of the part of the education that we need to get out there. So more to come on the stream gauges. I don't want to dwell too much in it, but there's some good initial raw data there. And as a group, we're going to dive a little bit further into it, see what we can tease out. But we're not going to go too crazy on this data. It really is informing a much larger process that it will be presented to the Water Policy Interim Committee that hosts the stream gauge working group. Okay, I'll go to the next one. More on drought and gauges. We've got our drought committee meeting set now for November 20th. This is going to be a pretty important meeting. There was a lot of activity, a lot of conversation around our drought plan this year. We had closures, we had hoot owls, we had things coming on and off, a lot of back and forth between recreation community and Fish, Wildlife and Parks and ourselves. So a lot of that will be discussed. How can we improve this program for everybody, voluntary drought management? So that's coming up on the 20th. That's not really an open meeting, but we're happy to take input to inform that meeting from anybody. So our communication lines are always open as far as that goes. I'll run through real quick. This isn't everything we're doing, but just sort of some of the top of mind projects and partnerships going on from my desk. We're contracted now with the Bureau of Reclamation to do some watershed planning, and the next step in that process will be to subcontract some engineering, some geomorphology work, and some GIS work in helping us go back into our watershed restoration plans, reprioritize where we're headed with all of our projects, and also kind of looking forward to working with Eric Trum and the DEQ program and seeing what can a watershed restoration plan really look like to be the sort of most up-to-date, functional, useful document that we can make. Really interested in sort of pushing the envelope there on what we can do with that plan. For those that don't know, our last watershed restoration plans finalized in about 2013, I think it was. We highlighted the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area as the sort of #1 place we wanted to focus work. And we have done that for the last 6 or 7 years. We've funneled, literally millions of dollars into restoration projects up there that have all been, something all of us can take a lot of pride into. And so, but we don't want to sit with that. We want to kind of reassess where our priorities are now that we've done a bunch of work up there and have identified most of the impairments and have treated them. So now it's time to go back into the list of watersheds that need work and get to it. So that's part of that whole planning grant. It's pretty exciting. Also looking into an RCPP application. That's the NRCS program. That's a large funding source over a long period of time. And there's interest in looking at irrigation infrastructure as the sort of practice that we would be improving. So we have several documents that have already prioritized irrigation infrastructures that need improvement, all things that will lead to more water in the river, better efficiency with water use. And there's lots of, sort of willing landowners and projects that have already been identified that we just need to know that we have some funding for. So look for that coming out. We'll be cooperating with the NRCS over the winter to start sketching out what this application looks like. We've got about a year to put this together, but it'll take about that long because it's a substantial pot of money, and we hope to be able to offer fixes for any rancher looking to improve, update efficiencies on their irrigation. We want to be able to be in a position to support that. Also, a lot of energy going into forestry work. Sean Claffey with the Sage Grouse Partnership looped us in to an application that he put in to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to address forestry conifer encroachment in sage grouse areas. We are focusing on mesic and riparian restoration in the Eastern Pioneers on BLM land, basically taking some of the BLM priority areas that they identified in an EA and taking on the riparian sections of those projects. And that will, with that funding coming in, that will free the BLM up to do more conifer work and lets us do the type of projects that we know how to do and have been having good success with recently. On the land use planning front, we reconnected with the 4 counties and the flood with the planning directors of the 4 counties, kind of got everybody back on board, identifying what is left to do in that world. I wanted to get a sense after this summer of what folks are seeing. Are we seeing an onslaught, an influx of people wanting to buy properties and asking for variances? The volume is not really great yet, but it was good to reconnect with all 4 counties on that front. On wildlife and forestry, there's been movement and energy at the regional and national nonprofit level. Folks, for several reasons, looking at wildlife movement and general sort of desire to do forestry projects, and folks have been coming to the Watershed Committee to help kind of get landowner interest and support for support with wildlife connectivity work, potential forestry work. It's all a little bit fuzzy right now, but needless to say, the Watershed Committee is really, we're the right entity to sort of funnel a lot of this energy and help coordinate, to not overburden any particular rancher with solicitations and things like that. But there's some ideas out there on re-upping the Forest and Jobs Recreation Act that John Tester had tried to pass some years ago. There's some interest in looking in Beaverhead County again and what's possible with an initiative like that. So something I've got my ears to the ground on, and we'll be updating you all as things progress. And then the second to last is it's proposal season, and we're busy putting together proposals both for the MWCC's Watershed Fund program and also the 319, DEQ's 319 program for water quality. We've got a couple exciting projects in the works. On the communications and marketing front, we had some good exposure this last month. The Dillon Tribune, just after our last meeting, I was out with the Dillon Tribune, and they put together a really nice piece about showing off, kind of tying the collaborative work that we're involved in along with a lot of our partners, but they really tied the recent grayling decision and were able to show how this collaborative work that we've all been a part of was a big part of the grayling decision and the improvement in grayling numbers. And the decision was to not list the grayling under the Endangered Species Act, which I think is something a lot of folks on this call have been working hard towards for a long time. So it's something to celebrate, and I think that article really captured the spirit of all of the collaboration that's going on, and thought the journalist did a great job reaching out to the right people that have been sort of really involved. So Jim McGee and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks were also highlighted in that article. So kudos to them. And then we also, the Big Hole Watershed Committee is a member of the Society for Ecological Restoration. I used to have a membership personally, and I thought I'd extend it out to the committee so that everybody on staff could have access to the articles and resources of that society. And they featured us in the in sort of a members spotlight. They featured our work and our Hold Back the Snowpack video. And so that reaches a global audience, that email newsletter that came out in October. Pretty proud of that one. And next slide. Lastly, the Big Hole Conservation Fund. I've been kind of mentioning it, and I just wanted to give you guys some quick visuals. I'm not gonna sit on it for too long, but one of the obstacles that we always face with getting good work on the ground is the lack of non-federal dollars to match with abundantly available federal grant programs to do all kinds of restoration and conservation work, irrigation work, all of that. We're constantly asked, you know, hey, do you have any non-federal money that you could put towards this project? I want to get to yes all the time when people ask me. So we have a strategy for that. And for the winter, we will be working on putting together the nuts and bolts of the program and really reaching out to everybody and anybody that has a vested interest in the resources of the Big Hole and giving them a great, easy way to either themselves or their clients, folks that are visiting the Big Hole from outside, that are having a great time on the Big Hole River. We want to give them a place where they can make an investment into the future of the river for it to stay this way and actually grow and improve. On the right there, just real quick, the general sense is the more non-federal matching project dollars we have, the larger our ability to win federal grants. The more we win federal grants and we can get more projects on the ground, we improve ecosystem services, we improve resilience, we improve the resources overall. And with that, with the in-house expertise that we have, those federal grant dollars really support our overall operations, our staff time, and with that, we have more consistency and more stability with our funding to continue doing the good work that we do. So it's kind of the overall picture of where we're headed, and I'm looking forward this winter to start reaching out to the private sector and businesses in and around the Big Hole that love the resource and giving them a great place to, you know, partner with us and a great easy way for them to partner with us and promote themselves as a conservation-minded business entity. And I think the feedback I've gotten so far across the board has been pretty positive about this idea, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the near future. With that, I think that is everything that I've got to report on, and I'm happy to take a few questions if there are any. And if we don't hear any, we'll just move on to the next item. And that would be steering committee. Anybody? We've got 3 of you on there. Anybody want to chime in?
Steve, go ahead.
Well, we did have a steering committee meeting. It's kind of been fits and starts. We had one scheduled in person at Fairmont that ended up getting canceled, and we rescheduled and had one just like this, a Zoom meeting. Basically, it was just getting caught up on activities of the staff over the last 3 months. And we did hear this proposal from Pedro regarding some kind of localized fundraising efforts. And that's pretty much it. Jim, you miss anything there?
You covered it well, thank you.
Okay. Less news is good news, how would I like to say. Let's go on to wildlife.
All right, before we do wildlife, I did just want to mention real quick to follow us on social media and sign up for our e-newsletter if you're not already signed up. You can do that on our website, which is bhwc.org. So our Upper Big Hole Range Rider program just wrapped up its 11th season. Range Rider Chet Robertson patrols 6 U.S. Forest Service grazing allotments each year for 7 livestock producers. He monitors the allotments for livestock activity and predator activity from July 1st to September 30th. So this year there were no confirmed depredations on our enrolled allotments in 2020 as a result of Chet's monitoring. We did get new game cameras this year, and we got some pretty great pictures. So we're excited to be able to use those and to hopefully get some more next year. There was quite a bit of wolf activity on the range, so that's interesting. And interesting that there were no confirmed depredations that we know of. And there's also a resident grizzly bear in the Jackson area this year, and that was confirmed by people in carnivores, and I think FWP confirmed that too. Maybe Rory could clarify that for me, but yeah, another great year for the Range Rider program. Rory, do you know anything about that grizzly bear in the Jackson area since you're here?
Yeah, you're talking about the one that was west of Wisdom?
Yeah. I think that'd be the same one.
Yep, I think that was a confirmed one. Yep. So there was tracks, and then they did eventually get pictures of it. So
male, right? And it's been spotted a few times.
I think so. Yeah. Yep.
Great. Thank you. We do new this year. We have loaner toolkits for livestock producers. They include various scare devices, temporary electric fencing, bear spray, resource guides, and then we also have some bear safety toolkits that include bear-resistant backpacking containers, bear-related resource guides, more bear spray, inert bear spray for practicing, all kinds of stuff. So if anybody is interested in borrowing or testing any of those supplies, either for their operation or just to recreate, just get in touch, and our contact information is there, and it will be in our minutes too. New this year, I guess, we're starting to work with beavers, or work to prevent conflict with beavers. So we were recently able to meet up with the National Wildlife Federation, the Clark Fork Coalition, and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks at the Mule Ranch to install a beaver culvert fence. And you can see there in the photo, there's a before and after picture. So the before, they had a kind of vertical culvert there to deter beavers from building in the culvert, but it wasn't letting through quite enough flow. And so we built this fancy structure there on the right with their cattle panels. And you can see there's a picture of us down there on the bottom working together. Ben's wife and baby came out and got to watch too, so it was a really fun day. Nice to get out of the office. So yeah, very nice, very rare these days. And we were featured today in the Montana Beaver Working Group newsletter, the October edition. So more media coverage for us. Pretty cool. So we're trying to reach out to landowners. If you have any problems with beavers, get in touch with us, and we will see what we can do. And all I have, Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add about the beaver work?
No, I have a couple pictures in my slides too, but yeah, it was great to work with Vanna on the Mule Ranch project, and really excited to see what that looks like in the spring, how it holds up in the spring, and what the critters do. So
yeah, definitely. Well, if does anybody have any questions about wildlife?
I've got one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
This is Jim Hagenbarth. I've been involved in some of the collaborations in regards to Western Land Alliance and trying to figure out how to address predation and wildlife activity on, big game on ranches throughout the West. And so they're trying to work up some way to collaborate with all the agencies. And you have all these jurisdictional boundaries that the wildlife in the predators don't pay much attention to. And if you're a livestock owner working against those and the predators jump from one state to the next, it really causes problems in how to manage them. Because the Fish and Game agencies in each state have different priorities and ways to work with wildlife. So that's been quite interesting. Alex Few has been running those conversations, they meet twice a month through Zoom. And so I'll keep you abreast of that. But, you know, we haven't had much predation on the big hole. But I'll keep you tuned to that.
Great. Thanks, Jim. And I'll also put out just a quick ask, which is that our range rider uses a four-wheeler to do his work, and that four-wheeler we reimburse for expenses related to that, but it's getting to be an older piece of equipment, and so we are, to kind of maintain his ability to do his work as efficiently as possible, we will be trying to figure out a solution for making sure he has the right equipment. So if anybody has kind of an inside track on new or used ATVs that he could use, that's something of interest to us, and we're willing to make it work to make sure that Chet has what he needs to do his work. So I'll just throw that out there for now, and feel free to follow up with Tana or myself about that. If anybody has ATVs lying around that they don't use, particularly between July and October, we can put it to work. And I think with that, I think Ben, you're up.
Okay, can you guys see my screen? Assume yes.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. You got me now?
Yeah, it's coming now. There you go.
Okay. Another busy month for me. I'll go through each of these individually, but I was able to get up to Elkhorn Creek to electro shock fish with Jim Olson. We got both of our beaver conflict mitigation projects completed this month. We also completed our 2020 Anaconda Uplands construction project. Just finishing up my East Fork Divide 2.0 Beaver Dam analog project. And on top of all that, we have a lot of grant proposals that we're eyeing as well. So about halfway through this meeting, I also realized that I don't have a slide in here for the fence pulling day that we had right after this meeting last month. And shout out to everyone who came and helped out. We got all the fencing cleaned up on that California Creek project, and was really enthused with the amount of people who came, and it was a great day. So yeah, thanks again to all the volunteers who came out and helped us clean up all that fencing.
And Ben, is there any of that fencing still left over to give away?
You know, I haven't driven the road recently, and I know I spoke to Vanna last week, and I don't know if she did either. So if there is any still, it's available for anyone who wants to take it. There's a lot of good material in there and a lot of T-posts that are in really good shape.
Okay, so metal T-posts, 8-foot metal T-posts, and 8-foot welded wire, 2x4-inch holes, kind of deer buster fencing is all sitting there rolled up on the California Creek Road in the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management area, ready for someone to take it home and make it useful.
Yep. Yeah, right after the fence pulling day, Jim Olson gave me a shout and said, "Hey, can you come up and help electrofish Elkhorn Creek?" And I jumped on the opportunity. We had a really great day out there, and what we were doing we were surveying the creek for population estimates for fish. So this all ties into my Elkhorn Creek Mill and Mine planning grant, and hopefully the eventual restoration project that can come out of it. But we surveyed 4 reaches in total, and like I said, that's important data collection for would be pre-project fish populations. How are these fish doing in that creek right now? And how are they going to respond after hopefully our eventual project way down the line here? But it's good to have this data now for grant applications and just getting the full picture of what's going on up here. So for those of you guys who think Jim Olson's just out there fishing on the creek, no, he's working. I was trying to keep up with the guy. So it's a great opportunity, and like to keep doing this kind of stuff when I can jump on it.
And the important thing there is folks don't know Elkhorn Creek. It comes out of the Coolidge ghost town and that old mine and mill, and there's basically acid mine drainage still going into the channel. And it turns out that the fish populations are showing that where the acid mine drainage is dropping into the water, we're not seeing the fish. So it's obvious, but got to go get the data. That was awesome, Ben.
Mm-hmm. One noteworthy thing too, I don't know, I guess I was surprised. There was a lot of West Slope cutties in there. I think we shocked 2 or 3 brook trout in there. So it's a pretty cool stream. It seems to be doing okay, but Jim's going to go over all the numbers this winter. Again, this was a beaver conflict mitigation project that we did this month too. We got the Anaconda Deer Lodge County Road Department guys involved here, and this is on the Sugarloaf Lodge property. They were having some issues of the beavers plugging up the culvert and flooding out the road. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to throw one of these devices in here. And one thing that was really helpful with both of these projects that we did was I had Elissa Chott, who's with the Clark Fork Coalition. She's the beaver mitigation or, beaver human reduction specialist with the Clark Fork Coalition. So she kind of helped Tana and I walk through these projects, good experience to do some more of these in the future. They're pretty simple looking, but, some thought needs to go into them. So yeah, this was a great day, great partnering. And again, happy to, excited to see how these things turn out. Here's some cool before and after photos I took. You can see the photo on the left in July. This was kind of what the county was trying to do to reduce the beavers from plugging up that culvert. It really wasn't doing the job. And on top of that, this beaver dam actually blew out, and so a lot of that debris caught up on that fence. But you can see our pretty new culvert fence here on the right here. So beaver deceiver, culvert fence, keeping the beavers out of the culvert. So reducing conflicts and keeping the critters on the landscape is what we're after. Again, Tana touched on this, but worth noting again, we did another one of these this month on FWP property. Had a good turnout. Again, different kind of configuration on this fence. So, each one of these is kind of different. You got to kind of look at it, look at all the aspects of what's happening with the stream, where the beavers are. And there was a lot of lessons learned on this particular project. So all good experience. Again, yeah, this month was a big month for Uplands work in Anaconda. We completed our big construction project, and these are some aerials I took at the bottom of Muddy Gulch here. It was a pretty great couple weeks to be out there this fall because the aspen stands there were just going off. But what we did here, the basic premise of this project was to basically try to bring back to life this abandoned and blown out large beaver dam. We dug out a lot of the built up sediments from that dam, put them to the side here. You can see on the right hand portion of this, the picture is kind of where we were putting all the material that we dug out. We built some new meanders in there. And so the idea is that when that water's running off the hillsides and juicing in the spring, it's going to hit this project area. It's going to slow down, flood out, really going to hopefully pool up, and a lot of those sediments are going to drop out, and the creek will go on its merry way. So really pretty unique project. You know, these pictures don't do it justice, but you know, it was a little beaver dam restoration, some new stream channel construction, and you know, we built in some cool in-stream structures too to try to reduce some of the impact of the spring runoff up there. So again, looking forward to seeing how this one's gonna turn out this spring. It's always the exciting part of the work, is going back in the spring and seeing how everything's responding. Here's some other photos, actually, of the same project, just on the ground. The excavator sitting on all the sediments that were deposited by this beaver dam. So, you know, talk about sediment deposition. This is kind of it. This is what that beaver dam was doing. It was collecting a lot of the sediments from the uplands upstream and slowing the water down. So all those sediments were able to collect there. And it's about 7 feet of sediment, of built up dirt, basically, that we took out of there and lowered the whole footprint and created a lot of wetlands and floodplain here. And little cool part of the project was putting in some in-stream structures here on your right. You can see we put in some rock, we put in some alluvium, we put in some grade control structures. So yeah, pretty neat project right off there, off of the Mill Creek Road, right at the very bottom of the Muddy Gulch drainage. You don't have to hike at all. If you're in the area, stop by and take a look. These photos were taken today, just about a couple hours ago, actually. This is the East Fork of Divide. This is the second iteration of this project that we're doing. And these are beaver dam analogs we're putting in the stream. And basically, this 2.0 project, we went back to a lot of the structures that we built in 2019 and reinforced them. We put some new ones in, and then I had the crew bump up to a new reach that we didn't hit in 2019. So this is these are some brand new beaver dam analogs that we put in today. Hopefully, you know, we really low flows right now, but we were already backing up a lot of water. You know, these beaver dam analogs are going to catch a lot of that sediment, grade the stream bed up, and activate the floodplain. And you know, this is a heavy natural storage, water storage project. So we're putting in 55. The crew will be done tomorrow, hopefully, and we're thankful the weather held out on us. So great project. This is just one. You know, it's like hard to take photos of this stuff. Photos often don't do it justice, but we can see water backing up already on this brand new structure that we built today. So yeah, and you know, that coupled with all the grant proposals that I have on my desk right now. Pedro touched on the forestry cooperative. That's going to be a DNRC large scale restoration grant proposal that's coming in, actually due here in a couple days. We're eyeing some 319 DEQ grants, and again, the Montana Watershed Coordination Council project fund. So hopefully we can secure some funding, and you can hear about some new projects that we have coming out soon, hopefully, knock on wood. Great, and I think that's all I have. Yeah. Any questions, anyone, or?
No, I have a question.
Hey, Roy.
Or I'll even share Steve's video picture with you. So I didn't. I've listened to the Beaver mimicry Zoom meetings and sat in on a couple of them, but I didn't think until now. So what kind of fish passage is available to trout in those beaver dams? I've heard that they can squeeze through some natural beaver dams. Can they get through those mimicry projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. A bit out of my wheelhouse. I'd say that, you know, it depends on the frequency that you put them in at. I think the ones that we're doing on the East Fork Divide, where I don't think that we're impeding passage just because of the distance that we're putting them into. But, you know, I think some of the literature out there is kind of foggy. Pedro, do you have any?
Yeah, the site to look at, really the folks that pioneered this stuff, if you look in Bridge Creek, the Bridge Creek project in Eastern Oregon, the folks out of Utah State, they did a 10-year study. This was funded by NOAA. It was salmon, key sort of salmon spawning ground. And that's the best known study that I've seen of long-term, you know, fish tagging and pit tagging and on the whole slew of sort of watching fish move. And they didn't show, and they put in dozens and dozens and dozens of these things, really large scale. And they showed plenty of fish passage through the structures. Gives us some confidence that these things aren't, they're not no-goes for fish, especially at high water. At high water, it's a barely visible speed bump. So when there's plenty of water, the fish are getting up and through them. I know that FWP also did some studies in the Ruby or in Red Rocks, I believe, where they did a project, and they noticed it kind of came down to, you know, you're slowing the water down, and then the water will spread out to around the sides, and there'll be these sort of side channels where the water sneaks around the structures. And very preliminary results showed that the beaver dam analogs that had 2 overflow channels had better passage than the ones that only had 1 overflow channel. Little things like that. It's new. There's not a lot of, actually we wanted to get Jim actually doing a pre and post fish study on this particular project. But we just didn't get the buy-in to do it from landowners. The projects that we've done beaver mimicry structures really intensely, like California Creek, where there's hundreds of structures in that channel. The channel goes dry, and it was such a blown out stream system that actually working with Jim, he basically told us that there wasn't a concern yet. Like, let's get the functionality and the sediment under control first. And then we'll worry about whether fish can get all the way up to the top or not. So I think it's an important point, Roy, where we do these types of projects and what the fishery is in that particular area is something that's hugely important to know. I guess the other thing is, if it is determined that fish aren't getting from point A to point B, it doesn't take much to pull some structures apart and let more water flow through them or on top of them.
It'd be hard to determine if the fish are growing.
Yeah.
You'd have to really be paying attention.
Yeah.
So, Jim Olson, do you have any experience with that?
I don't have much like direct monitoring of these sorts of projects. But I mean, just given what I've seen of, especially the ones on like California Creek, I mean, generally they're not that tall too. And they usually create a pretty decent pool downstream of them. And even a small brook trout can jump a couple feet. And so, I from what I've seen of them, the ones that Pedro and Ben have built, obviously the frequency of it could slow fish passage, but if a fish wanted to get somewhere, I would definitely not call any of the ones that I've seen them build, fish barriers sort of a thing.
Thank you very much.
You want to see a fish barrier, see what Jim did on French Creek. Down below. That's a barrier.
Yeah.
With cement and all. Cool. Ben, is that?
Yeah, that's all I got, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the whole fish passage and BDA thing is a fantastic for any students out there interested in restoration fisheries. Great master's or undergrad type projects related to that question. And we're always interested in entertaining eager students, stuff like that. Okay, finally, I think we get to the main event. Am I right, Tana, or is there anything else?
I don't think so. I think this is it.
This is Jim Hagenbarth. Pedro, I just want to mention that the Whitby Committee put out a study, HJ40, on cloud seeding, and a piece of legislation will be presented by Senator Gillespie in the Senate, either the Natural Resource or Ag Committee. And so that's going down, and we need the support. So at some time I probably should give a webinar to the Big Hole Watershed Committee, eliciting your support of that in the next legislative session. Thank you.
Fantastic. How did you gave a talk last night, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
How did that go?
It went fine. You bet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, we'll hear more about that in the future. We'll stand ready to find out more about it and lend our support. Okay, so without further ado, we've got Vanna Bacadori and Jesse Newby on deck to talk about some of their wildlife research and work in the Big Hole.
Okay. I drew the short straw, so I get to go first, and Jesse will go behind me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sounds great.
All right, hang on one second. I'll put my... Okay, can you see me? All right, now bear with me while I try to pull up my computer.
Yep, looks like it's coming.
Okay, can you all see?
Yep, you're good to go, Vanna.
Wow, that's no easy feat for me because I'm not a techno person. Are you seeing the like movie screen version, or are you seeing my notes?
It's not the notes, it's still I see the slides on the left and then the screen.
Okay.
If you go to view and then reading, I think it's reading view, that'll pull it up full screen.
Okay, where's the view?
The toolbar at the top.
Under
File, home.
All right, I have display settings.
No,
I'll do that?
No, you go File, Home, Insert, and then there's a slideshow.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm being dumb on this. It's
no problem.
I'm not seeing what you guys are seeing. On my screen, I have the whole thing. So.
Oh yeah, this is we're seeing your slide, your notes view.
Oh,
right now.
all right, hang on a second. Okay, so. Maybe if I minimize this. Bear with me. I'll just talk amongst yourself for a minute.
It's hard to do in the Zoom world.
Oh, God.
From this
You were
screen,
close.
if you can see the toolbar where it says File, Home, Insert, Design, blah, 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 scroll over
Yep.
to where it says View.
Okay.
Hit that, and then go to Reading View. It's like the, yeah, that should get you.
Okay.
I think maybe don't click it again. Why is that not working?
I don't know.
There's something saying slideshow, resume slideshow.
Oh. We hit the
Do I
X.
want to resume?
Oh no, maybe that gets you back.
Maybe don't do notes. I don't know. I thought I had this figured out earlier. It worked perfectly fine when I practiced it. So, okay. Well, can I?
You can do it that way.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Can you guys see that? Okay. Okay. Just don't peek over to the right and get the what's coming. So, okay. So a little bit different format this year. Pedro had asked that I focus a little bit more, that Jesse and I focus a little bit more on the different projects and research that we have going on various critters in the big hole, and not so much on the population and harvest trends. I do have that data available afterward if people have some questions about different hunting districts and want to know trend information. But I'm going to spend the next, hopefully not more than 15 minutes, kind of running you through a few management projects that we've got going. And then I'm going to kind of cut off at a good point and then segue right into Jesse Newby's presentation he's got for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is mountain goats in the Beaverhead Mountains. And this is something that Craig Fager and I worked on last March. It was a comprehensive cooperative goat survey with Idaho Fish and Game. This is the first time that was ever done. And maybe I gave you guys a brief update on this last year, but between Idaho Fish and Game and Craig and I, before Craig left, we covered within relatively close period of time, maybe a couple weeks time, all of the Beaverhead Mountains, which if you see in this little map that I have down in the corner here, this is the Beaverhead Mountains. And it represents what had been 2 goat districts on the Montana side and 2 goat districts on the Idaho side. And I know I've spoken to you all about this in the past, but both Idaho and Montana closed down our seasons back in 2005, 2006. The main reason for that was concern for dwindling populations. And when we all looked back at the data, we basically were double dipping on harvest. We were not communicating and cooperating across the state line there. Idaho was setting their quota, we were setting our quotas, and not in full recognition that this really is one population of mountain goats. And so we were taking anywhere from 3 to 8 animals out of there annually. And the average harvest, 50% average of the harvest were nannies. So no surprise, population went down. So anyway, what we did was we flew winter surveys in March. That's when we generally have found is the best time to try to locate mountain goats, because there's nothing else pretty much leaving tracks up there except for wolverine that time of year. So whenever you see tracks, you follow them out and you're going to find some animal, either mountain goats or wolverine. We did not see any wolverine, but we saw 86 total goats between Idaho's efforts and Craig and my effort. Of those 86 individuals, 71 adults, 5 of them for sure were yearlings. There may be some of those adults that were misclassified that actually were yearlings as well. And then 10 kids we did see. So The literature suggests that if you are between 75 and 100 goats, you could conservatively have a hunting season in that population, probably not more than one tag. And the reason for this is that, goats are not like white-tailed deer. They're not like mule deer, elk, where they will compensate. Hunting season is kind of compensatory. You're taking out, a segment of the population that may die of winter starvation. So you're kind of, in some ways, doing them a favor. With goats, hunting is additive. They're going to die of winter starvation. They're going to die from, predatory attacks. They're going to die from other things, and they're going to die from hunting. So you have to be really conservative. Plus, they are slow breeders. They don't breed as early or as regularly as the other ungulates do. So, so that's why a real conservative harvest rate is warranted with mountain goats. So with this 86 that we have observed, that's a minimum count. We were careful to kind of rule out any double counting. So we know we have a minimum of 86 in there. With that, I'm kind of kicking around the idea of what it might look like if we reopened the Montana side and the Idaho side, rather than 4 hunting districts, make it one district on Montana side, one district on Idaho side, and do one tag every other year between Idaho and Montana. Jesse Newby and I and a couple of the other Fish, Wildlife, and Parks biologists have a meeting set up with our counterparts at Idaho Fish and Game in December, because we have a lot of shared wildlife populations, and between elk, mule deer, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, sage grouse, grizzly bears, wolves, antelope. So we it just behooves us all to kind of get together and talk about these shared populations and management on either side, what that's looking like, how we could kind of help each other out, and specifically help the populations out, do the best for the populations, by not forgetting that they don't stop at our borders, they go across the border. So so this is an idea that I want to kick around with Idaho folks when we get together with them, but I'll throw it out to you all too, to either chew on it and give me some feedback at a later date, or if you have some thoughts after I get done here, to share with the group. So so I'll kind of leave with that with mountain goats, and but I am curious to hear some feedback on that proposal for sharing one tag with Idaho every other year. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is give you an update on the sage grouse project that Jim McGee and I have been working on. First thing I want to mention is this is not a project in isolation. Jim and I have been working with a lot of different partners on this, making this project possible. Big Hole Watershed Committee, a lot of landowners in the upper Big Hole Valley have been giving us access, been really awesome in that regard. BLM has been funding the lion's share of this project. Forest Service has been cooperative partners with us, DNRC, the Nature Conservancy, and Vigilante Co-op Electric also. So, and just to remind folks, we're just kind of, the mission of this is similar. We're building off the work and the model that was started with the Grayling Project of, trying to learn more about the needs of the sage grouse population that's in that upper Big Hole Valley and any places that they might spread out from the Big Hole. But in full recognition that we're doing this on a working landscape and that there are other uses, other needs, human uses of that landscape. And so how can we use these critters to tell us their story, tell us what their needs are, but make sure that we're finding common ground with the human needs of the land as well. So I've got the objectives listed there, and so it's kind of some basic stuff. We just want to know, get a better idea of how are the sage grouse using the upper Big Hole Valley? When are they using various parts and pieces of the Big Hole Valley? Are they moving outside of the Big Hole Valley? And the importance of that to genetic connectivity to other populations across Southwest Montana and possibly with Idaho. And then to have a better understanding of their habitat needs during the nesting period. So those are kind of the basic questions that we're trying to answer there. This just gives you an idea of in the upper Big Hole Valley where we have leks, and each of those lek areas, as you recall, they're kind of in the mating grounds for the sage grouse. Generally, the peak of the lekking season is from early April to early May. What we've been finding out from this study is, and other people have found this out as well, but we're just kind of confirming it for the Big Hole Valley, is the males will show up first, and then the females generally are coming in maybe second or third week of April there. So we have been trying to spread our capture efforts out. The first year we focused on these leks right there, centered around the center of the valley in Wisdom Country. And then last year, in 2019, we did some captures down in the upper end, and then also up or down the lower end. I always get confused with up and down in the Big Hole Upper Valley. So, but here's kind of the rundown. We had 15 hens that we captured in 2018, 2,000 in 2019, or 15 in 2019. And then this year with COVID and quarantine, it was just a crazy year. We were only able to get out there and capture 2 hens this year. We've had mortalities each year, and a couple of unit failures. One of these little backpack units fell off. So that's leaving us right now with 9 hens on the air with these little backpack GPSs still on. But we are planning on continuing out this project for another couple years. We have about 20 or so units that we can still get out there next year, hopefully. So we're just going to kind of keep rolling with this as long as we can with it. One thing I want to point out with this graph on the bottom, and I apologize, I don't have this on the big screen, so it might be a little bit harder to see. But this shows along the bottom is the months of the year, starting with April of 2018 through September of 20, so through this past month. And then along the left side here, 1, 2, 3. And these bars represent the number of mortalities that we had at various times throughout the year. The thing I want to point out to you is here's April and May of 18, here's April, May, June of 19, April and May of 20. This nesting period is a vulnerable time basically for these birds. And that's where if I had a cumulative graph that just had January through December, regardless of year, the April and May bars would be your tallest bars. That's just, they're most vulnerable when they are nesting. And as you could imagine, they're sitting under a sagebrush, trying not to be seen and focused on trying to incubate eggs, occasionally taking themselves off the nest to go get something to eat and coming back. So pretty regular movement patterns, and makes them more susceptible to predation. So we have not had any harvested hunter harvest, but this fall we did have a hunter harvest a bird in Medicine Lodge that had one of these GPS backpack units on from the Idaho study. So we do have a lot of documentation of birds getting captured and collared on their winter range, or kind of late winter, early spring in Idaho, but then they're flying into Montana to nest. So that's one of the species that we'll be talking about when we have our joint meeting with Idaho, and just being fully aware that a state border doesn't mean much to critters. So okay, let me just move on here. So looking at nesting and the summary of what we've seen for nesting, 2018, we had 16 total nest attempts, and of those, 4 of them were second nest attempts. So what happens often is if it's early enough in the season and their nest fails for whatever reason, they may attempt a second nest. It's a huge energy expenditure for them. They're laying anywhere from 6 to 10 eggs, 1 a day. So it's taken them, a good week to a week and a half to lay those eggs, and then incubation generally is about 28 days. So even if that nest gets predated or fails due to weather, the first weekend, they've already invested about 3 weeks of their energy expenditure. So just depending on how early they started nesting and they lost their first nest, they may or may not re-nest. So that's why you don't see a lot of second nest attempts. In 2019, we were able to document 20 nest attempts, 17 first nests, 3 second nests, and we had 9 successful hatches. This past year, 13 nest attempts and 5 successful hatches. If you recall, June, we had that snow, really cold weather, snow about June 11th or 12th, somewhere in there. I think that took out a lot of our nests. I know of one nest in particular with 8 eggs in it, and she was expected to hatch the day we got all that snow. The next day I went in to check her nest, and typically when I go in the day following the expected hatch, the hen and her brood are out of there. And so my going in there is not a disturbance. With that particular nest that I'm talking about now, she, probably because of the snow, she was still in the area, and I flushed her on the way into her nest, because I go in the day after to see if it was a successful hatch or not. And she had 1 chick left. So, 7 chicks in a 24-hour period. All the eggs had hatched, but only 1 chick was still surviving after just one day. And probably that snow and cold, was the reason the other chicks didn't make it. So these pictures here, this is what a successfully hatched nest looks like. Very interesting how the chicks will chip that kind of around the middle of the egg, and as they come out, somehow they invert the cup, the big end into the little end, so you're just left with a bunch of, looks like half of egg shells, but then if you pick up each shell, there's actually the 2 halves are tucked into each other. As opposed to that, on the right hand side, this is a nest that's been depredated. The shells are crushed, and they'll have bite marks, or just they look crushed. They've been bitten into. Oftentimes there's shells, fragments around the nest area. The nest cup itself is disturbed. So it's pretty easy to tell whether a nest had been successfully hatched or not. And what we do is we will wait until the 29th day to go check, even if we know the bird may have moved off, if the nest may have been disturbed. We're not, we're trying not to push that bird off the nest, and we've been pretty good about doing that. So this map here, it's really busy, but the take-home message is going to be really simple when I point out a few things to you. So this is May through May across the bottom. And then on the y-axis here is net displacement. And so it basically is just the distance moved by an individual bird from one day to the next. And all of these different colors represent a different bird. The bottom line here is just over the period of May through November, you have a lot of birds that really are sitting tight in the big hole. They're not doing much movement at all. A few of these birds are moving from where they nested to, these are probably the birds that had broods, and they're moving to wetter areas, to these what we call mesic areas during the brood rearing period. And you've got, someone in this particular case that made a big move from where she nested. So this would be where they were nesting, and then made a big move to the summering, where they want to spend the summer, and some forage areas. And then you get to November, and we have 2 birds that made some pretty big movements, and that's what you see here. All of a sudden, in a short period of time, they go for it, and they head, in this case, they headed down to the hairpin ranch. And from there, one of the birds stayed on the ranch, stayed in that area, didn't make a lot of movements. Once she made that initial migratory movement, then she stayed pretty close to that area. This other bird stuck around for a month or so, and then she made another big move, flew over the divide into Horse Prairie, and wintered amongst a whole, there's several flocks of sage grouse down there. Once she got there, she didn't move very much at all. And then come April, made a big movement back into the Big Hole Valley. Same thing with this bird that was down there at the hairpin, big movement back. So I want to point out, here's 2 birds that do some pretty major movement and migration, not quite out of the Big Hole Valley with this one, out of the Big Hole Valley in the case of this one here. But I also want to point out to you, all these birds down here, we have a whole bunch of birds that don't really move a heck of a lot at all, whether it's their nesting season, their summer and brood rearing season, the fall, right into winter. They're just kind of sitting tight in some very local areas with very little movements. This little jittery right through here, that March, April, that's when they're flying around visiting leks. What we find, or are finding, is that the hens are visiting multiple leks. The males might be show more fidelity to a lek, but the hens are going around trying out all the different leks in the valley. So interesting movement patterns there. This is just an aerial visual of that hen 160 that made the big movement out of the Big Hole Valley. So here's the Big Hole Valley. Wisdom would be kind of right in this area here. And this is her movement pattern for 28 months or whatever that adds up to be. And she did this twice where, she was hanging out in the Big Hole. This is where she nests and raises her brood down there by Fox Gulch. And then flew down to the Hairpin Ranch, spent a little bit, flew over the divide. This is the Horse Prairie country in here. Both years, early April, she worked her way around onto the Bannock Bench, and then appeared to fly over Carroll Hill back into the Big Hole. And she repeated that pattern again the second year. Unfortunately, she died here this summer, which is too bad, because I would have been interested to see if she would do this pattern, third and fourth year if we had her on the air. But at least for 2 years, she did some major movements and pretty predictable movements over those 2 years. So want to share that with you. So next steps for the Sage Grouse Project, we've got a whole bunch of data that we're going to really start using now, getting it analyzed so that we could, you know, this is all meant to be gain an understanding of the sage grouse in the upper Big Hole Valley so that we could turn it into on the ground projects, habitat projects or fencing projects, or, you know, things that are going to benefit sage grouse habitat, but also in full cooperation with landowners and land use, land management. So, but anyway, we're going to take that data. So we're at the 3-year mark here. We're going to put together a big progress report, do some analyses that we haven't been doing before. We've been collecting feathers. We're going to get DNA analysis done on those to see how the big hole population genetically relates to other populations in Southwest Montana and Idaho. And so once we get that report done, next year sometime, we'll be sending that out to everybody. I'm sure there'll be something interesting in there for people to look at. So we're also going to expand because of that one bird and the movement that she made. And I'll just put out a quick little commercial break on that, just to remind you that even though it was one marked bird, we have no idea how many other birds, you know, that movement with her. So there could very well be other birds in the big hole that are making that movement to horse prey. But given that what that one bird has shown us, we're going to expand our capture efforts onto horse prairie this spring, 2021, and try to capture some, because there's a whole bunch of leks where this bird was hanging out. So we're going to capture some of them, get these GPS backpacks on them, and try to expand our understanding of sage grouse, what they're doing there. So, and then, you know, we'll just keep running this project out as long as we've got legs to do it and finances and whatnot. So, and the batteries stay alive. So we're looking at 3+ years, hopefully more, of this project. Just to give you an example of some of the effort that's been projects that have come off of this data already. You know, again, we want this to not just be a gee whiz, isn't that sweet? What are the sage grouse doing? But to actually be boots on the ground projects. So some of the things that have come from it already is we've been able to share some of this data with Vigilante Electric Co-op, where they're putting the new power line up Butch Hill. Worked with them because we've got some, the data suggests that we've got wintering sage grouse in that area. So they designed their poles to eliminate any raptor perches in there. Jim McGee's been working on a couple of really interesting projects in the big hole. One in Steel Creek, where they're doing a bunch of mesic restoration that involves some of these water holding projects. In this particular case, in this photo, you're looking at some of these structures called Z-dike structures, but they're meant to retain water and improve kind of the mesic or the wet conditions in these areas, in conjunction with doing some conifer removal in the sagebrush stands there. He also is completing a big fencing improvement project on private land in the big hole. 8.5 miles of fence being removed, kind of wildlife unfriendly fence. And that fence was taken down and wildlife friendly fencing put up. Or in some cases, the existing fence is okay, we just need to modify it with the upper wire height or the lower height. So that's been going on. So, so now let me switch into antelope, pronghorn. It's funny, when I was in grad school, I did a project on pronghorn for my master's thesis, and, you know, was calling them pronghorn, and you didn't dare call them antelope. And then I come work for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and everybody calls them antelope. Well, now we have this big study going on, and we're, you know, research project, and we're back to calling them pronghorn. So, but anyway, we started this past winter what we're calling the pronghorn movement and population ecology study. We basically have captured adult does in all of these populations that you see on your screen there. So 8 different populations across Montana, and putting collars on them, GPS collars, so that we could better understand what their seasonal ranges are, what their movement patterns are, their migration to seasonal ranges. And again, it's not meant to be a gee whiz, isn't that great, look what the pronghorn are doing, but let them tell us what their needs are, how we can make conditions better for them on the ground for sustainability of those populations. The interesting thing about this project is it was grassroots, if you will, amongst FWP field staff, where kind of at the same time, concurrently, several area biologists started thinking that they would like to know more about their pronghorn populations. And so we kind of like forced the upper hand of FWP wildlife and kind of forged this project. And it's got a lot of great potential, because we have not, as a state, spent that much attention, time, and money looking at pronghorn movements in the state. So a lot of good things will come of it. So specifically, let me just go back here for a second. So I included the big hole population in this, what we're calling the big hole population, but it is really a population of pronghorn that winter on horse prairie and the Bannock Bench. And of the primary interest to me was that segment of that winter population that then will migrate into the big hole in the summertime. We're quickly learning that they have a lot of different summer ranges, and that's one of the interesting things coming out of this study so far, even though it's only been 7 months. But this map right here, this is kind of a accumulation of all the movement data for the collared does that we have in the big hole population now. Here's their range, and again, it's busy, but don't worry about the colors. Just kind of, do one of those squint your eye sort of thing and get the 30,000 foot view of it. This is the winter range down here, the Horse Prairie Bannock Bench, and this is where we collared. We got 46, we captured 46 does and put collars on them. We have had 13 mortalities already. Most of those happened within the first few months of the collaring operation. And typically when that happens, we generally say that those mortalities were associated with the capture and the stress of capture. So that's unfortunate, but we haven't had, I don't think, more than 2 mortalities since that initial period. And then we did have 2 collars malfunction, and we have 31 that are still on the air. But if you look at this kind of shows you where the winter range is, and then come summertime, we have some animals that don't migrate very far, just like with the sage grouse. We have some that go out to Argenta, some that go up to the grasshopper, some that go up Bloody Dick Creek, some that go over into that hairpin Saginaw country, some that migrate up through the Big Hole Valley, spend time over in the battlefield, up at Pintler Creek, and then this, near and dear to my heart, is we actually were able to, we fortunately captured a doe that does the migration all the way up to Mount Hagen. And I'd like to think that this is not a fluke just this year, even though everything else is so weird this year. But, for years, when I look at the antelope that show up on Mount Hagen, I've always suspected that they are coming from this population. So it's nice to have some confirmation. So, I am gonna walk you through some slides, some maps that are kind of gee whiz right now, just because it's very interesting, I think. So this is I'm going to show you some maps that are generated from an individual and various things that we are looking at when we see these animal movements and the stories that they're telling us. So this doe, BH 2024, this is an example of a non-migratory antelope. The different colors represent different seasons, and this animal has not moved very far. This is on Horse Prairie. Here's Bachelor Mountain to kind of get you oriented, and Red Butte. The town of Grant would kind of sit right off the south end of the map here. So this is a non-migratory pronghorn right here. She's pretty much just spent all her time on 1 or 2 ranches. Then we have a doe that has made a little bit more movement. So she's gone from Horse Prairie to Bannock Bench. That's her seasonal pattern, and we'll see if she comes back here for the winter time. But not much of a movement, but we'd still call that migratory. As I pointed out on the other slide, here's a doe that wintered in this Horse Prairie country. This right here where all the blue is that same area with that first pronghorn doe that hasn't migrated at all. So they kind of wintered together, and then she took off, and she's up here at Elkhorn Hot Springs, probably soaking in the hot tub right now, I guess. Then we have, some that went up into Bloody Dick Creek and have been hanging out there this summer. We have some that went around Carroll Hill and are over here on the Hairpin Ranch and in that country there. We have some that went up, one individual that went up Bloody Dick Creek and then went into Horse Prairie. And this is a really interesting one because this is a forested area, this pass. And you can see that doe made a beeline through those trees. But the fact that she even crossed over the pass, some of her compatriots went around this way, went around Carroll Hill and ended up in the same spot, and she chose to go through the trees over top of the pass and join them. So every time we hang collars on animals, we realize how much we don't know about them. Again, here's some that came up through the Big Hole and are over at the Battlefield area. This is up in that Pintler Creek, Chalk Bluff area. And then again, my favorite, the one that's up here on Mount Hagen. It'll be interesting to see if and when they do their fall migration and if they come back through the same pathway. Anecdotally, people have been telling us for years that when they migrate back through the Big Hole on their way to winter range, it's a line, single file of hundreds of antelope, and there's a pinch point. They're going through this Carroll Hill back over into the Horse Prairie area. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'll take any questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jesse. He's going to pick up with what we are doing with that pronghorn data, and then talk about some other things too. So I'll stop there if anybody has any questions for me.
Havana, Jim Hagenbarth. Does the I-15, that's a pretty staunch border for those antelope to migrate through?
Yep. So we have not seen, let me go back to this major slide here. So far, we are not seeing any animals push even close to that, with the exception of this one doe that went to I-15 and then headed back over to Bannock. So it could be that this population in particular is not wanting to go in that direction. Or it could be that they've learned over time that that's just not a direction that is permeable to them. But so far, we're not seeing much impact from I-15. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Van, I was struck by the last comment you made about sort of anecdotal evidence from folks that live around there, and that's something that has come up for me, or at least as a curiosity of mine, is just sort of for the folks that live in the area, you know, watching these movements year after year and year after year, I'd be really interested in seeing sort of how your like real-time data with their anecdotal data kind of stack with each other, and what the potential is to sort of integrate kind of that local knowledge with the scientific knowledge.
Yeah. So one thing, Jim and I, it was Jim's harebrained idea, Jim McGee, and I am foolish enough to think it's an awesome idea. We want to follow that migration next year of that doe that goes the farthest all the way to Mount Hagen. So follow her path from Horse Prairie to Mount Hagen and follow in her footsteps so that we could kind of see what exactly she's up against as we're going. And I, you know, just looking at this, when you look at, here's probably 6, 7, 8 individuals, and they are one on top of each other, following the same path up through the Big Hole Valley there. So I don't doubt at all that those anecdotal stories are true. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Vanna.
Yep. Any other questions out there?
Quick question for you, Vanna. Do you have any more of those collars for the sage grouse? You mentioned that one died. Are you going to be putting any more on, or are you out of your inventory?
Yep. No, we've got 16 new ones that didn't make it out this year. And then we have, you know, we recover everyone that we can from those mortality events. And so we probably have about 22 that we're going to try to get them all out next year. So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, folks. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm not good at keeping within 15 minutes. My apologies.
Pardon me, Vanna. This is Paul Clary. I was just going to ask you about the sage grouse. How long are they productive in terms of reproduction? You know, if they're not, you know, run into some hazard that kills them.
Sure. So I would guess that they're probably, you know, productive for 3 to 4 years. And, you know, in part, I'm drawing on experience from my domestic chickens. You know, and they're born with the number of eggs that they're going to have for the year, for life. So once those eggs are spent, they're spent. And I don't think their lives are very long. I mean, we haven't seen them, you know, 3, 4 years. It seems like, you know, we're capturing as adults, and we have a few that we captured in 2018 that were adults then that we still have alive now. So I think probably 5, 6 years is the maximum life expectancy.
Good. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. I'm going to hop off this screen here, and so Jesse could hopefully have better luck than I did. And if anybody has questions, you could always get in touch with me. So. Oh, shoot.
Okay. So do you all see that?
Yep, you're good to go, Jesse.
Okay. Yeah. See if we can get that in there. Okay, so Vanna mentioned that what's motivating this effort to collar and track their movements is really to find management applications for that. So I'm just going to talk about one of those management applications. So Jesse DeVoe, who works on the pronghorn project for Fish, Wildlife and Parks and the U of M Wildlife Co-op. Back in May, started putting together these movements. And so this is just a map, just to explain what this big mess is. It's a map of a whole bunch of different individuals' movements. Each individual is represented by a different color. And he went through their movements and tried to identify places where it looks like they were just kind of spinning in circles, places where they were lined out and their movements became really linear, like they were bumping up against something, or even just bumping up against something and moving away, and trying to determine if there were barriers or things entrapping them. And then Jesse got us all together. Oh, and actually, before I get to that, I should also mention there's similar data out of Idaho where they collar these animals down in Idaho, and they would come up and they would summer up in Montana, like up into Horse Prairie here. And here is some of those movements, and you can see as they're coming up against Highway 324 there, there's this fence that runs all along this, and they seem to be banging up against it. And so this is just another case of them apparently running into something that's impeding their movements. And Jim asked a question about I-15, and talking to the Idaho guys, they think it's a definite issue. And you can kind of see that right here. There's I-15 right there, and you can see those antelope don't cross it. So anyway, we being Fish, Wildlife and Parks and Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, different non-government organizations all got together and went out there to survey fences out in this country based on what Jesse was seeing in as far as potential movement barriers. And so this is one of the maps we came up with. And so when we went out there, we would look at what type of fence, was it barbed wire, was it woven wire, how many strands, take some measurements on its heights, look for crossings, and then come up with what we would ideally like to see happen with those fences in terms of modification or in all of this red here, fences we would like to see replaced with wildlife friendly fences. And here's just an example of the kind of fences you would see. So in some of those kind of red fences we'd like to see replaced, here's some woven wire, a couple strands of barbed wire on the top, a couple strands of barbed wire on the bottom. You can see Vanna's dog Willie is perplexed of how to escape out of there. And so we would like to go in and replace those with some wildlife friendly fence. So this is just a model of our ideal fence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly to these specs, but we would like to see 4-strand barbed wire about 40 to 42 inches high. And then that bottom wire about 16 or 18 inches off the ground. So something that would turn the cattle, but still let pronghorn and elk get through there easier. And I guess just for reference, when we were looking at all those fences, the median height of all those fences we sampled was 45 inches. And the bottom wire, the median height of that bottom wire was 9 inches. So obviously pretty challenging for a pronghorn to crawl under. And oh no, you guys might not be able to see these numbers. Can you see the numbers on the right of the screen?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, good. I can't. But so I can't see the numbers, so I'm just going to make up the numbers. But I think we in total surveyed about 45 miles of fence, and the bulk of that, about 35 miles, we would we would like to see some kind of modification. In some cases, just, you know, raising or lowering a strand of barbed wire. But there was over 20 miles that ideally we would like to see removed and replaced, and that's obviously a lot of fence. So we will have to take this in smaller bites than all that we go. And for this upcoming year, what we're hoping to do is work on a project where we would address 13 miles of fence, 9 of that being removed, but the projected cost for that is almost $200,000. And so that involves, you know, getting the labor out there, getting the materials, in cases where we have to replace the fence, getting a contractor to put in the new fence. But as Pedro mentioned, lately there's been a lot of energy behind connectivity and migration. Part of that you could see in some high-profile journal articles on migration that have come out. And that's created, with that energy, some opportunities for resources. So back when Ryan Zinke was in the Department of Interior, he set aside a pot of money for improving habitat quality, deer, elk, and antelope, winter range and migration corridors. And so we're hoping to tap into some of that. And what we're looking at for this upcoming year is putting in a grant to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, perhaps the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program with the Fish and Wildlife Service for funds, and then trying to come up with match. We have landowners who are willing to contribute their labor to do some of the work, and also sportsmen's groups and conservation organizations like Van has been talking to 2% for Conservation, and they were interested in helping out both with volunteer efforts and funds. So that's kind of what we have going for that Horse Prairie fence work this year. And now, in the interest of time, I'll just turn over to some of the moose work and an update with that. So some of you may know Fish, Wildlife, and Parks studied this study in 2013. The goal is to run it through 2023. So we have a few more years in it. And the study was set up to address two things. One was to come up with a cost-effective monitor strategy for moose, and the other was to get a better understanding of their population ecology, what's driving their population dynamics. So because we have limited time, I'm not going to talk about the monitoring work. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but I'll just focus on population dynamics. So the idea here is we're interested in is how these populations are performing. And that's going to be determined by these vital rates here, things like adult female survival, calf recruitment. And then at the beginning of the study, we set up these hypotheses of what environmental factors might be acting on those vital rates. So you can see that whole mess of arrows right in here. I'm pointing at my screen. This whole mess of arrows here is just different hypotheses of how these factors might affect these vital rates and ultimately population. And we have 3 study areas where we've worked on this. It's the Cabinet Mountains up in northwest Montana along the Rocky Mountain front, and then of course down in the... And to date, we've marked 162 animals. So this gentleman here is Nick DeCesar. He's the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks research biologist that's leading the project. We've marked 162 animals. We try to maintain 30 animals on air in each study area every year. So we go back out there and for animals that have died, try to get collars on new animals to replace those. And tracking those collars through time is what gets us that vital rate information. Things like adult female survival, calving, calf survival. But of course, when we have them in hand, we can take various morphometric measurements and samples to look at their condition. And so we have, think over 500 moose years of adult survival work. To assess pregnancy, we take samples when we capture them, but also we go and track down those collared individuals to get fecal samples, and from that we can get progesterone to see if they're pregnant. And then there's a lot of flying done in the spring to see who has a calf with her, and then regular flights throughout the year to see how those calves survive. So that's when I'm showing you some of the data. This is basically the field work that data comes from. So just looking at the fecundity side of things, on to the left there, this is adult pregnancy in the different study areas. You can see it's all in the 80s, with the Rocky Mountain front tending to do a little bit better. And this does appear to be tied to nutritional condition. So here's Nick here measuring the rump fat on a moose during our winter captures. And pretty much what you see is if they have some rump fat present, they're very, very likely to be pregnant. But if they don't have any rump fat, it's pretty unlikely. And there's some other nutritional condition measures that come out, like blood iron levels and things like that. So it appears like those Rocky Mountain front moose are in somewhat better nutritional state, and that's reinforced by looking at yearling pregnancy and twinning rates. So those have been known to really track the nutritional resources moose have available. And you can see, we haven't had any yearling pregnancies in other study areas, but almost half of those Rocky Mountain front ones are pregnant, and then higher twinning rates. Yet to see any twinning in the moose, at least with our collared animals. And so this translates into our fecundity measure. So this is basically the number of calves per cow out there on the landscape in spring. Again, Rocky Mountain front leading things, and then big hole dragging behind a little bit. And so after they're born, in order to be recruited, they have to survive that first year. So this is just a graph showing survival through the first year in the different study areas. And we do see some differences in there. We have tended to see pretty high survival on the Rocky Mountain front, but noticeably low survival in the cabinet fisher. And we actually think this number is a little high. That 34% is a little higher than the reality, because we think we're actually missing some calves right after they were born before we can detect them. And so it might be a little bit worse than that. So that begs the question, what might be driving those differences in calf survival? Now, I guess one thing that will change this conversation quite a bit, maybe in the future, is how this past year is stacking up. It almost looks like the Rocky Mountain front and the cabinet fisher flip-flopped on their survival. So we're yet to see if that's a fluke or if that pattern holds out. But what we'd really like to do is try to figure out what might be driving that calf survival. And kind of the most obvious hypothesis was the predator composition in the different study areas. That cabinet fisher area has relatively higher densities of wolves and black bears and mountain lions, and possibly that has to do with that lower calf survival. And so we don't want to just wave our hands and say, well, we think there's more predators up there. So what we've done is we've started a remote camera project where we've randomly placed remote cameras out there on the landscape to get detections of these predators. And hopefully we can use those to get a relative measure of predator activity and then see if we can tie that to things like calf survival. For adult survival, what we see is that the cabinet fisher, especially, and also the Rocky Mountain front, tend to have pretty high adult survival. But over the years, the big hole's kind of lagged behind and has had higher mortality. It's improved over time, but if you include those early, especially those first 5 years, it wasn't looking too good. And when we get those mortalities, what we like to do is get on them as quickly as possible and try to establish the cause of death. So this chart here shows the various mortalities we've investigated and how we've classified them. You can see there's a little bit of everything in there. But the mortalities differ quite a bit between the study areas. Almost all the predation is happening in the cabinet fisher. But overall, the health-related mortalities really dominate things. And we definitely see that in the big hole, where we get a lot of these animals that just seem to lay over and die. And so this has us thinking a lot about potential parasites and diseases in the system. And the common thread that seems to run through a lot of these mortalities is a parasite known as Elaeophora, or arterial worm, and it's carried by mule deer and transmitted by flies. But when it gets into a moose, moose are a dead-end host for it, so it just ends up collecting a bunch of these adult worms in its carotid artery. And if it gets real bad, it could cause issues like blindness or even death. And we do see pretty high worm loads in a lot of these mortalities we're getting. So this is just a smattering of some of the mortalities in the big hole and how many worms we pulled out of their carotid arteries. You can see this moose laying right here, how its ears all cropped. That's a pretty common sign of Elaeophora. So what's probably happening there is the ears aren't getting enough blood and they're getting frostbite and dying back. And Fish, Wildlife and Parks has done some kind of surveillance monitoring, looking at hunter kills, so heads from hunters, and looking for Elaeophora worms in those. And in this area, it came out to about 32% of the hunter kills were infected, and they tend to have about an average of 10 worms. So if we imagine those hunter kills represent a typical, probably reasonably healthy moose, you can see a lot of these ones dying have a lot higher worm loads. Now, whether that's a cause of being worn down in some other ways, that they're getting these infections so bad, or if these infections are actually causing the mortality, remains to be seen. So when we put all these numbers together, so we get that adult female survival and calf recruitment, which is fecundity, so the amount of calves born and their survival, we can use those to estimate the population growth in these populations. So you see this heavy black line where it says lambda equals 1. If you're over that line, you'd be growing. If you're under that line, you'd be declining. And you could see that in the cabinet fisher here, if you go down here and look at their calf recruitment, well, it's not too good because of that poor calf survival. But they have really high adult survival, so it doesn't take a whole lot of calves to make it stable or possibly increasing. And with this most recent year data, it'll probably be firmly increasing end of things. In contrast, you have the big hole here, which has had better calf recruitment, but it's kind of just had trouble with that adult survival. And it's slowly over time just creeped up towards this line as that survival's improved over the years. And I think it's probably pretty close to stable now, but you can see that adult survival is giving it trouble. And then on the Rocky Mountain front, it's just been doing great in all respects. Though I think this next year it's going to move a little lower down, closer to that line. So all of them are kind of converging, basically on stable to slightly increasing. And so, I guess I was just reiterating there. It looks like the populations are all kind of converging on that stable to increasing, but what's functioning in those populations, or what's really driving population growth in those different areas, there's kind of a different story each place. So in the Cabinet Fisher area, we think that predation's playing a role in calf survival to influence that growth rate. On the Rocky Mountain front, it looks like they have pretty good forage resources that helps those females become really fecund and boost those growth rates. But the biggest factor influencing population growth is this adult female survival. We see that in the big hole, and it really seems to be driven largely by some kind of parasite or disease, and it seems like likely Eleophora is part of that. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I know it's late, but.
This is Jim Hagenbarth, Jess. Have you looked at all at increased number of elk and the stress they put on the moose population?
No, that's a very good question. So I think one thing we could do there is those remote cameras, they're not baited or anything. They're just on game trails and things like that. And we are collecting all the, deer and elk pictures as well. And we have discussed looking at the influence of elk numbers on some of that. I will say that there's a lot of overlap with elk and moose on that Rocky Mountain front. So at least in that system, resources don't seem to be as limited. But that's a very different system than the big hole, where it might be more of a factor. But that's a very good question, and something I think there's potential to look at.
Thank you.
Jesse, one thing I've heard about in other parts of the country is temperature changes, climatic changes, anything like that. Does that factor in at all for you guys, as maybe even with the parasites or diseases responding to differences in climatic conditions? Is that something that you guys look at, or is it not really a factor?
We did do some work with that. When we first started this study, we put out a lot of temp loggers, and it wasn't so much to get a profile of the temperature in the different study areas, but was to ground truth models that do look at temperature. And so that data exists, and we definitely were thinking about it, especially early on in the project. You could see it's one of our hypotheses there. At this point, we're not seeing a lot of evidence for it. One thing that could work through, and this didn't make it any of the slides just because I was afraid I didn't have time, but is tick loads. So moose suffer in some places quite severely from winter tick. And that tick, it's like a big tick year is when you have like a real open spring, especially an open spring in a mild fall, to really build up that tick population. And it can hit them pretty hard. And, you know, it does, we've seen some evidence on the Rocky Mountain front where when we've had more open springs, we see higher tick loads, and those big winters that we've had recently up there seems to knock them back a bit. So there could be an interplay in there. But so far, our tick loads are just don't seem to be biting into the population at all. I think it's just because we don't have anything close to like they do in Maine or someplace like that. But I think, you know, it could eventually change the dynamic. And I think that's where we worry most is through the parasite and disease ecology.
Great, thank you. All right. Any other last questions? Oh, it's a beautiful picture. Fantastic, you two. Thank you so much. That's great stuff that you're doing.
Patience.
Absolutely, it's totally worth it. I can't help but wonder if it just seems like a huge workload for you guys. And I keep thinking you guys are, each of you kind of needs to clone yourselves to really be able to get all this good work done.
Well, I guess I will say that, you know, a lot of this is being lifted from, you know, people like Jesse DeVoe and Kelly Prophet and Nick DeCesar. So at least what I'm presenting here.
Yeah. Well, each of them need clones too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again. We always love hearing from you guys on the wildlife front. That's a big part of the big hole. Certainly very interesting. Thanks you also to everyone sitting in, and you're mostly all still here, and that's awesome to see on a late night. Unless anyone's got any parting thoughts or messages, I will, let's close this meeting out. We will be back on the Zoom machine in November. And it looks like we've got, Tana, can you give us a quick heads up on who we're meeting with on November?
Yeah, our next meeting will be November 18th. It'll be at 6 p.m. because of daylight savings time, and we will have Alyssa Schott with the Clark Fork Coalition and Sarah Bates. I always forget her last name. Sarah Bates with the National Wildlife Federation will be joining us to talk about beaver conflict reduction. So that should be a fun one.
All right. Fantastic, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us and sticking with it this night. I hope everyone stays very, very safe out there. Careful with the COVID. Stay safe. One of these days, we're all going to get back together in person. So do what you can to keep yourselves and your neighbors safe, and let's get through this together. And reach out anytime to staff. We're always here, and you know, all of what we do starts with you all, and we're here to serve.
Thanks for a great meeting.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great night.